We come now to the middle of Act 5, Scene 3 of King Lear, as we look at it in terms of how we might analyse it in Paper 1, English Literature A-Level for AQA, the literature paper that focuses on tragedy. Now, the section we're going to look at is the moment in which Edgar returns to challenge Edmund about the letter that he's seen that says that Edmund and Goneril are plotting to kill Albany so they can be together. This was actually on the 2021 paper, so it's line 110 to 149. So positioning this, it's after the battle, it's coming towards the end of the play, but what we're seeing is the disintegration actually almost immediately of the what we might call the bad guys, their cause and their alliances. Just prior to this, we've seen a debate between Albany and Goneril and Edmund and Regan around the relationships between them all. Albany dismissing Edmund, I hold you not to be a brother in this war. Regan saying, well, actually, he's my partner, he took my troops into the war, so Edmund should be equal to you, Albany. And then Albany saying, oh, well, I don't think that can be the case because my wife already has a claim on him. And then jokingly says something about, well, since she's my wife, you should ask me if you want to be involved with her. So there's a lot of bitterness flying around, and this was there before the battle and after the battle. It shows that what happens at the end of Shakespeare's big tragedies, there's 4 really, really superb and superior tragedies that stand above everything that Shakespeare or anybody else has ever written. And in all of them, some kind of justice happens towards the end, that the bad characters, the ones who we have not approved of their behaviour, the ones who've behaved selfishly, immorally, cruelly, the ones who've murdered and deceived, do get their comeuppance. Claudius in Hamlet dies, but so did lots of other people. Macbeth himself dies, but again there's a fair amount of violence before we get there. And in Othello, the chief antagonist Iago is caught and arrested, and his crimes are revealed. So there is a sort of justice, and this is worth remembering, that in Shakespearean tragedies, the ending, we always say it ends in death, and it does. Everybody dies, pretty much, but there is a sort of justice, and this is the justice section of this play, but it's not the end of the play. So justice happens to some extent. You can argue how just the dispensation is, but it doesn't conclude things, and it doesn't end on this happy note, although there was an attempt to rewrite the play in the 18th century, and that did try to put this rewritten ending on, where Shakespeare, his horror was mitigated by perhaps Lear surviving with Cordelia. Very much not in keeping with the feel of the whole play, though, I think, and it doesn't work when we think about it in any detail, really. So it was Nathan Tate actually who rewrote the ending first in the late 1600s, and that continued to be the ending that was favoured, but we'll look at that next time a bit more, perhaps. Here then, we've located the passages coming after the battle, but also immediately after Edmund's cruel decision to say, go kill King Lear and Cordelia to one of his soldiers, and immediately after some strong disputes between all of the unfavoured characters, the immoral characters, to the point where we've got the impression that Goneril has poisoned Regan. She mentions she's feeling unwell, and Goneril says, I'll never trust medicine again if that's not the case. So things are breaking apart even worse than ever, if you might say. Let's have a little look at the sequence then. So it's after that sequence there, this is the bit on screen now where Albany is sort of confronting Goneril and talking about her, she doesn't have a claim on Edmund because she's already married to him. And my sickness grows upon me there from Regan. But here's where the section began, and it was as the trumpeter sounded and the herald reads out this proclamation. And this is the summoning of Edgar. So it's very formal, a real moment on stage, but the danger of it is it can feel very slow. How do you make this dramatic? How do you make it tense? We've got this sort of Regan being helped off stage feeling sick. We've got Goneril kind of looking interested, nervous, pensive, interacting somehow with Edmund. But we've got this tension that isn't really tension because we know Edgar's going to come back. We know he survived the battle. We saw that in the previous scene. So why this big build-up? I mean, it perhaps undercuts rather than actually enhances Edgar's claim to justice because it makes it all seem rather over the top and unnecessary. But the herald reads out this formal declaration. If any man of quality or degree within the lists of the army will maintain upon Edmund, supposed Earl of Gloucester, that he is a manifold traitor, let him appear. And then there's 3 sounds of trumpets and a big wait. Everybody nervously shifting. Of course, it takes us back to the first scene and the great formality of King Lear saying, "Which of you does love us most?" The sort of formality of a court sequence, the kind of waiting for answers, the ideas of justice hovering in the air. It's a sort of rewrite of that opening in a totally different meaning. And Edgar arrives, and of course Edgar throughout the latter part of the play has seen himself as the voice of justice, the voice of right and wrong, and here he's going to try and prove that. So we need that sense of formality, but it doesn't have to be a long wait, I don't suppose, because that can be frustrating for an audience. Albany's the one who's in charge here. He's stepped up, hasn't he? And he's ordering people around, and he's taking control. Edmund and Goneril, I suppose, watching with some suspicion. And when he first starts to describe what he knows, Goneril says, "an interlude," as if, oh, this is just a pointless little bit of chatter, it's meaningless. She can dismiss it, but this is the evidence that it can't be dismissed. There's something big happening here. So Albany says, "ask his purpose," and gets the herald then to say, "What are you, your name, your quality?" And Edgar maintains his disguise. He's like the mysterious, vengeful superhero here, the masked superhero. "No, my name is lost. By reasons tooth bear on and canker bit." Still that kind of bitter, furious language still hiding in there. It never goes away in the play. There's still a lot of kind of violent language and troubled language and tormented language. "Yet I am noble as the adversary I come to cope." So I'm as noble as the person I come to fight. Of course, in theory he is, because he's his brother, so he's very equal to him, which is the adversary. Again, this very formal, close. Albany then asks, rather than getting the herald to, which I wonder if there's a significance in that he's drawn perhaps towards Edgar. The two of them start to see each other in this scene as the voices of reason and the voices of hope and the voice of the future. And Edgar says, "What's he that speaks for Edmund, Earl of Gloucester?" It's a funny way of putting that, isn't it? Instead of saying who's Edmund, Earl of Gloucester, who speaks for him? The Earl of Gloucester obviously bit he denies, but he uses it because that's a formal title that Edgar's got now since he's taken that away from his father. Edmund himself, what sayest thou to him? Perhaps less certain than usual from Edmund. There's a bit of a boldness, but also a nervousness there. A kind of shaking in the voice, really, because this throws him out a bit. You might say, if you want to be cynically sort of realistic about it, surely you would guess, who could this be but Edgar? Don't know, maybe. Edgar makes a long speech, then, "Draw thy sword. If my speech offend a noble heart, thy arm may do thee justice. Here is mine." So in other words, we'll have a sort of trial by combat, and if I'm wrong and you are good, then you'll be able to fight and win, because there's this belief Edgar seems to have, which was a later belief, really, sort of an early medieval belief, that sort of God would side with the good character, but it was something that probably had existed throughout history, that somehow the gods will favour you if you fight to prove and clear your name. Behold, it is the privilege of mine honours, my oath and my profession. I protest, Morga, in spite of your strength, you've placed in Amazons, despite thy victor sword and fire new fortune, thy valour and thy heart, thou art a traitor. Long-winded, saying good things about him, praising him, and perhaps building up in the audience's the thought, well, this weak and gullible Edgar that we saw at the start of the play is not going to be able to fight and defeat the cynical and tough Edmund. Surely he will fight dirty and beat him, basically. False to thy gods, thy brother and thy father. Well, he isn't really false to his gods, because remember he said, thou nature art my goddess. So he doesn't believe in gods, he believes in nature, and he's been true to what he thought was his true nature. But he's certainly been false to his brother and father. Conspirators against this high illustrious prince. That's Edmund's plot with Goneril against Albany. And from the extremest upward of thy head to the descent and dust below thy foot, a most toad-spotted traitor. So again, violent language, animal language, a really kind of labelling of you as subhuman and dust and filth, and there's a real insult there, and it's part of the language of the play throughout, that we've got this violent, animalistic, and unpleasant language, really, kind of dirtiness and filthiness about the play throughout. Say thou know this sword, this arm, and my best spirits I beg to prove upon thy heart, whereto I speak thou liest. That liest is there as a 2-word line, a kind of spitting in his face. There's a real threat there. And you might say that why this speech is so long and drawn out is because it's Edgar speaking with great bitterness and resentment at the way he's been treated, and how he's now got his chance to say what he wanted to say all along. He can now speak up and say what he wants to say to Edmund. You're a horrible, horrible person, and you've treated me really terribly, and I've come for my revenge. Now, the section that was on the exam finished with Edmund's following speech, so it didn't get the end of the fight. But obviously that might be part of how we would explain it, that we know the fight ends with Edmund losing. And it says, in wisdom I should ask thy name, but since thy outside look though so fair and warlike, and that thy tongue some say of breeding breathes, what safe and nicely I might well delay by rule of knighthood, I disdain and spur. So there was this rules of knighthood. Now these are not really ancient Britain rules, they are more medieval rules, and so Shakespeare started to sort of alter the time zone of his play, really, in a way. The culture that he describes, it doesn't really describe an ancient British culture, but there was this concept that you shouldn't, if you were going to fight a duel with somebody, you had to know their name and who they were first. You'll see this in all the Arthurian medieval legends, that there's always this kind of, who are you? But often those rules are bent with people refusing to say who they are because they've come for vengeance, so this image really is something out of a medieval ballad, a medieval tale, and there's a lot of these Arthurian legends, particularly around King Arthur and the knights, that feature this kind of jousting, this kind of trial by combat. I disdain and spurn is Edmund, isn't it? That's good. The other bit seems a bit weak and uncertain, like I should ask your name, but I'm not going to. But then I disdain and spurn, perhaps he rises himself up. He's a little worried. He seems to like the look of Edgar. He knows his voice is an educated voice, but he also seems to recognise that he looks pretty warlike. And so the disdain and spur is him kind of finding the old Edmund back there, of I am strong, I am tough, I can beat this guy. Back I toss these reasons. So there we go. With the hell-hated lie overwhelm thy heart. So lots of H sounds. So a real kind of breathing in his face. And obviously Edgar must have some sort of mask or helmet on, so he can't see who he is. Which, for yet they glance by and scarcely bruise this sword of mine, shall give them instant way, where they shall rest forever, trumpets speak. So in other words, I don't care, I'm going to fight you and you won't be able to beat me. And so that's how Edmund kind of enters into the fight. And Usually the fight is somewhat drawn out. We see Edmund falls there, but we don't see his death in this sequence because he staggers on for quite a while, but we know that he's defeated. So justice has come. Edgar has got his own back. Edmund has been toppled fairly quickly. 149 lines into this scene. From the start of the scene, he was powerful and ordering people around and cynically plotting the death of Cordelia and Lear, to here we see him defeated and in fact dying. And it could be the happy ending that Name Tate and others wanted. But we know that there's more to come, and that's something worth bearing in mind if you're analysing this sequence. This is not the end of the play. That there's a lot more unpleasantness and quite a few more deaths before we conclude. But it's also worth remembering that tragedies do not entirely end with everything going wrong. Everything has gone wrong, but there's also the sense of justice. Things do go wrong for the bad guys too, and that's worth remembering. And the next thing that's going to happen is that Edmund is going to die, and then we're going to hear that both Goneril and Regan are going to be dead too. So the bad characters, the evil, cynical characters, are going to die first, and Edgar and Albany are going to sort of stride around feeling rather pleased with themselves for a little bit, but more on that